Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Wallace Collection Online, and welcome to today's Meet the Expert talk, Dutch Silver in the Wallace Collection and in the Rijksmuseum. We'll be making a start in just a few moments at 1 o'clock, where I'll be handing over to Dr. Ada de Wit, curator here at the Wallace Collection, and Dirk Jan Biemond from the Rijksmuseum as well. Before we do, however, as always, there's just a little bit of housekeeping. So firstly to say, if you're having any difficulties with Zoom, please do get in touch to let us know. You can either do that via the chat or a Q&A function on Zoom, or if you're having difficulties on YouTube, you can send in a message via the chat function there. Alternatively, if you're having trouble with the chat or Q&A, you can always send us an email at learning@wallacecollection.org, and we'll try to get back to you as quickly as possible. You can also use those chat and Q&A functions to send in any questions you may have for today's speakers. So please do get those through, and we'll have a little bit of time at the end of today's talk to answer any questions or queries you might have. We'll also be recording today's talk, so if you miss anything, don't worry at all, you'll be able to catch up again on YouTube afterwards. And finally, just to mention that if you require closed captions, we do have a live captioner for today's talk. So to select that, just click on the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom screen there, or if you're watching on YouTube, you should receive live captions as standard. Now, with all those boring bits out of the way, please allow me to hand over to Ada and Dirk Jan for today's talk. Over to you guys.
Arnie, thank you so much for this introduction, and hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on such a sunny day. And it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Dirk Jan Biemond, a curator of silver at the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, who looks after some of the most wonderful pieces of silver I think ever made. And he has been a curator at the Rijksmuseum since 2002. And together with his colleagues, he worked on the new Rijksmuseum galleries, which opened in 2013 after a 10-year closure of the museum. And since then, he has worked on the first systematic publication on the silversmithing centers in Holland. So Dirk Jan, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Ada, for the invitation.
Our talk will take about 45 minutes, and we'll make sure that there is enough time for questions. And we will focus today on pieces of Dutch silver that our museums have in common. And I'll begin with a short introduction to the collection of silver in the Wallace collection. Then we will discuss ceremonial chains, examples of the civic patronage. And then Dirk Jan will talk about silver in the Rijksmuseum, and we'll end up with discussing luxurious baby linen baskets, example of silver made for the elite for private use. But before I will talk about the Wallace collection, well, Dirk Jan, why silver? Why did you become interested in silver?
Well, that took a while, because I'm a specialist in decorative arts and we're not in first instance drawn to silver. I've worked on historic interiors and I've worked on furniture. And silver was to me a group of shiny things, a kind of large-scale Christmas decorations. And only after a project with the Rijksmuseum about 20 years ago, I became interested, since this material has specific possibilities. There's no art form so well documented where you can now know exactly when, where and why, by which ateliers works of art were made. But Ada, what was your feeling with silver, your first intro?
It's actually, for me, it's the other way around. So my background is in silver. My first MA thesis, my first internships, my first job, they were all related to silver. And then my interest expanded, and then I work on decorative arts in general. And at the Wallace, I look after a variety of materials. But I think silver is very special. I think it's that not only that works of art made of silver are so precious, but the material itself. And I can really relate to what you've just said about silver being so specific. And I think, well, you probably mean hallmarks. At least that's how I interpret it. And I love reading marks. You can really feel like a detective when you read hallmarks. And a few years ago, I followed a short silversmithing course. And I think that really helped me to appreciate silver even more and helped me to realize something very basic, but I think we often forget when we look at silver, that all these like amazing three-dimensional objects often begin as a flat sheet of metal. So yeah, that's my story.
Wonderful. What is your collection like?
Right, so just by the way, just to confirm, so you can all see my screen, I hope. All right, you can see my screen, the one
I can.
Okay, super, great, thank you. Right, so the silver collection was the silver collection at the Wallace is a small collection, but we have some really important pieces, and they're mainly German. There's some also Dutch items, Scandinavian, and English. The museum is associated with French 18th century art, so one would expect to see French silver here at the Wallace, but we don't really have it. And it's not that surprising because there's not that much old French silver that survives. A lot was melted down. And that's a very important feature of silver that I think people have to realize, that yes, you can melt down silver. And that happened, of course, during various political upheavals, fiscal crisis, when people needed money. And well, there were a lot of this kind of crisis in France in the 17th century, in the 18th century, including the French Revolution. So a lot was lost. But also silver is often has been melted down because of changing fashion. And in the 17th or 18th century, the value of a silver object lay more in the metal than in the craftsmanship. So yes, a lot was melted down, and not only in France. Of course, I mean, you know that a lot of Dutch silver was melted. Well, the family, the Hertford family and Sir Richard Wallace, they also owned a lot of family silver, including tableware, but that was not included in the bequest. We know that they had a lot because there are still some inventories that survive. Here I'm showing you one which is specifically related to their silver, but it's very basic. It does not provide much information. As you can see here, the first line, it just says a pair 20-inch oval meat dishes, and that's it. So I don't really know what kind of silver that was. But the pieces we have in the collection, they were mainly collected by Sir Richard Wallace, whom you see here. And he was interested in Kunstkammer objects. Well, Kunstkammer objects are the kind of small, exquisite, three-dimensional items that are often made of precious materials. That includes Renaissance silver. And Wallace bought quite many German pieces, but also some Dutch items, basically silver that was available on the market at the time in the 19th century. And here I would like to very briefly show you a few highlights. So you see, for instance, a figure of a silver ostrich with a horseshoe in its beak. And Sir Richard Wallace acquired it just 1 year after he had been given a coat of arms and the title of a baronet. And his coat of arms features an ostrich with a horseshoe. So I can just imagine that he must have been delighted when this piece appeared on the market, and it's just pure coincidence. So of course he needed to buy it. Then I'm also showing you here a wonderful dish, which we think was made in Italy, but we don't know for sure because it's not marked. And it has a beautiful decoration. There's just so much going on there. Lots of different motifs. There are representations of the 4 seasons, 4 elements, planets. And there's a nice anecdote connected to that piece. Sir Richard Wallace was not the only one who was interested in Renaissance silver in the 19th century. There were many other important collectors, including Ferdinand the Rothschild. And Ferdinand the Rothschild was interested in acquiring this piece, but he was too late. And at some point he visited Sir Richard Wallace at Hertford House, and he saw that dish here, and he got really, well, upset, annoyed, and then he mentioned that in his memoir that he should have acted quicker. Another piece which I would like to show you is this cup, which is really small. It's like about this size. It's a perfect Kunstkammer item, not really for use, but just more to show. And it has this exquisite enamel decoration. Wallace bought not only European pieces, but also non-European. And we have, for instance, a wonderful pair of Chinese silver candlesticks that I'm researching at the moment. They have the imperial provenance. And you see one of these two candlesticks here as well.
Good.
Oh, and I forgot to show you this. This is the set of toilet items made in Augsburg, 18th century. It's probably the largest known toilet service made in Augsburg in the 18th century that exists. Even we have the original storage box. And I think it's interesting to mention that in the 19th century, there was not that much research done on silver. So Wallace not necessarily knew what he was acquiring. And I think this is a nice example. It's a small mirror. And when you check the back of the mirror, you see this inscription that claims that it was made by Bernardo Cennini, the very famous 15th century goldsmith. But I don't know, Dirk Jan, what you think, but I think it's very much wishful thinking.
It is. It looks, what is wonderful that you have the thread work on the back, which is not Italian at all. It's probably, could be German, could even be Dutch. But Cennini, no. That's
No.
for one thing, that's sure.
No, definitely not. And then I would like to also show you this painting, which shows a selection of works of art that belong to Sir Richard Wallace. We have all the pieces. We don't have the painting because the painting was not a part of the bequest. So now it's in Germany, not the Wallace collection. But it also shows silver. So for instance, the large dish, which I've shown you just a few minutes ago, you see it in the background. And I would like to draw your attention to that piece in the front, which you can see here. And it has this very characteristic shape. It's a chain with different shills attached to it. And if you know the Wallace collection, then you will recognize it. It's displayed in the smoking room. And it's a ceremonial collar that was made in Harkum in the Netherlands in the late 15th century. And I will actually show you, this is where Harkum is located. You see that red pin. And when you see Harkum, it still has this layout of an old fort. The collar consists of various links and shields that are attached to it. And I will now show you a few details. So you see, for instance, one link, which has that very nice foliage decoration, and there are various figures and animals in various links. But here you see St. George killing the dragon. And St. George was the patron of the Civic Guard to whom this collar belonged. That was that Civic Guard of St. George in Harkum. And Dirk Jan will tell you more in a minute about Civic Guards. There's another link with a parrot. I'll explain a parrot in a second, why a parrot. But there are also other links with animals that are more traditionally associated with hunting. And then there are these different shields. The oldest shield is the one you see on your left-hand side, and it's from 1499, and originally it was decorated with enamels. But the latest shield is from 1826, but they're from different years. The one on your right-hand side is, for instance, from 1692, and there are various names and coat of arms that are engraved on these shields. And then there are also these scrolls, which are in fact the symbols of the Burgundian dynasty. And again, why the Burgundian dynasty?
Well, one of the things which you have with civic guards is that their jurisdiction is they're keeping the peace, but they're doing so on behalf of themselves. That's why you find St. George. On behalf of the city, so you will find symbols of the city, but also for the overlord. And the overlord in the 15th century in the Netherlands, in this part in Holland, I should say, not the Netherlands, was the House of Burgundy. So you can see that the privilege the House of Burgundy gave to the city of Gorkum. That's what this refers to.
Okay, thank you. And yes, so well,
parrots.
Yes. So the collar would have been worn on very special occasions, and that would have been worn by a so-called king of the Civic Guard of the Guild. And that was the winner of the annual shooting competition that took place, outside of course, the town. And the target was a model of a parrot. Well, I don't know why parrot, but it was a parrot. And
no one knows.
No one knows. Okay, so we don't know, but it was a parrot, and hence very often you have a motif of a parrot incorporated in the decoration of such colors. And then the winner would have been allowed to wear the collar on special occasions. He was the so-called king. And then at the end of his reign, his name and the year of his reign and the coat of arms were engraved. And hence what we have is the kind of collar that belonged to someone, to the guild, with the shields that mention various kings from, as I said, 1499 to 1826. And there were three civic guards in Gorkum that were active. So there's the one that belonged, whose patron was St. George. That's the so-called Old Civic Guard. And that associated people who were armed with foot bows or crossbows. Then there was also the Guild of St. Sebastian, and they were armed with longbows, and the new Guild of St. Christopher, and they were armed by fire weapons. But yeah, Dirk Jan, please tell us a bit more about the importance of civic guards in the Netherlands.
Well, civic guards in the Netherlands are a voluntary kind of militia. So they are just the burghers of the city who were asked to join a fighting squadron in a sense. And those fighting squadrons could be used to defend the city from a problem, from enemies out of the city, but they could also they should also protect the enemies within. So the burgomasters could ask the militia to put a revolt down. And that is what you find. The interesting thing is that you have them in any city in the Netherlands. And you also find many, and that is interesting because that means also that many of the cities once had a collar. So what you're having here is a ceremonial piece with a lot of coats of arms around it. Mm-hmm. So they end up as a ceremonial piece, and that's also the reason why many of them have been are still there. You might know the civic guards mainly because of their paintings. Mm-hmm. Here you've got the Amsterdam cloveniers. They were, as the guild in St. Christopher in Gorkum, armed with firearms. And it is probably the painting the Rijksmuseum is best known by. But on the other side, you can see what was put on their chimney piece. And that is it's the government of the militias, and they are presenting the silver. And the great thing about this painting is that some of those objects which are now on the painting are also in the Rijksmuseum. One of those is the chain.
You mean the picture on your right-hand side showing the regions of the guild, and there's one man holding the collar.
He's holding a collar, and mm-hmm. What he is doing is that he is checking the names which were on it. So what he is doing is thinking about the age of the cloveniers, and hence their importance, because old is very good in early modern Europe. The older, the better.
And you have this particular collar.
This particular collar is in the Rijksmuseum, which we'll show you now. And that is fun, because what you can see is, again, that you have it is later than the one of Wallace. It is about 20 years later, but it has the same type of decoration. We have only 2 of those chained, because you have still the full set, which is important because that makes it that helps you to understand what the thing is actually about. And the full genealogy of winners, which in Europe piece is still present, is no longer present in the Rijksmuseum.
So that's very unusual to have that many shields on a collar.
Yeah, because what often happens if they are transplanted into a museum, that all the later editions are taken off. So, and that has been done in very early in its history. I think here we know that it looked like this in 1804 already. So even then, when it was transplanted to the museum of the city of Amsterdam, one of the forerunners of that, all those coats of arms were removed. But you also can see some of the symbols. One of the little one on top, that is the symbol of the cloveniers in Amsterdam, which you also see on the painting and also on other things. That it's their coat of arms.
And could you explain to our audience who the cloveniers were?
The cloveniers were they're one of the 3 city militia. There you had the Saint George, just as in Gorkum, with the longbow, Saint Sebastian with the footbow, and in the end, in 1522, a new militia was reorganized, and that were the cloveniers, and those are the ones armed with firearms.
And there's a parrot.
And there is, of course, a parrot, because you have to have your parrot.
Okay, brilliant. And
but this is not the only one in the Rijksmuseum. This is one of the, and what is great is that when you show them all together, you can get an idea of the differences, the local differences mostly, between one from Gelder, which is on the east of the country, which is the oldest one in the Rijksmuseum. That's one from the 1480s. The middle one, which is from The Hague, which was the biggest center next to Amsterdam, the center of the court, where you have, you can see that the guild is called Saint Hubert. So you will find symbols of Saint Hubert in the chain. And the third one is from Vlissingen in Zeeland, which is in the south of the country, close to England, one of the closest parts to England, and that is a very plain one. So those differences are specific to Dutch silver, and they give you an idea of what the regular production in this type of thing would have been like. But of course, it is not one of the biggest and the best, and it is not one of the biggest and the best is not made for one of the big centers. That is made for a very small village in Brabant. It is about this size. If I would have to grow fairly large to actually to be able to wear it. And it is also, but the interesting thing is that an object like this, there is a specific design has been made. So you find all the usual elements, but what happens here is that they are incorporated within one design. And all those wonderful leaves, you can also see on the Gorkum example, but there are also little jokes going around. So you have, if you see, for instance, those mountains, which are going around, and you count them.
The gold ones.
The little gold mountains. If you look at them, that you'll see that they are rabbit holes. Because after rabbits were very important in the country of Zevenbergen, and it's also what their name means. So there are 7 mountains, is how the name of the city translates. So you will find 7 mountains, but then not real mountains, but little rabbit holes instead. It's lovely.
That's a very nice little motif, yes. And I know you also have a slide with marks.
Yeah, because that's the other one which is interesting here. It is one of the few which is actually marked.
That's on the back.
And that's on the back. That's what you can see here is the back, where you have the most space, and where you can see actually each chain has been marked separately, and they all have the same set of marks. And what is rather strange is here is that you have only the hallmark of the city and the hallmark of the master. But I think that you're going to tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, because I think before we go into details, I think it will be important to explain what really hallmarking is about. So often silver is marked, not always, as we've seen a few examples, but often. And what people normally would expect is the maker's mark. So that's the mark, usually with an initial, but not only initial, that identifies the maker. Then you would also have a year mark and a town mark. And a year mark says something about the year when a piece was assayed. And assaying is the process of checking the quality of silver and whether the right amount of silver was used in alloy according to the rules of the town. But I know that you mentioned that this is here quite unusual.
Well, it is unusual because what is unusual here is that you have only the two, but then you should have the next slide, I think. That would help now. It's because the Netherlands were... the Netherlands were a federal state. So what happens is that defining how an object should be hallmarked and which types of fineness should be used is in most countries in Europe the prerogative of the sovereign. Here, the provinces are the sovereigns, so they can make their own laws. And what happens is that is in the west of the country, in Holland, they follow the French method fully, even from the mid-15th century onwards in some cities. In Brabant, where this piece was made, they're following the tradition in the Brabant tradition, which is, and what they do there, the date letter was an option, was not necessary. So some cities had a date letter by the 1520s. Most of them did not. And Breda is one of those examples, and that's what makes it fun.
But does it also mean then that there was less of the quality check?
No, what it means is that you have different types of fineness. So in Holland, you had two different types, 943,000 silver in fineness, and if I remember, about 900,000 in fineness. Those were the two possible there. In Brabant, they were following the Flemish type of fineness, which is 900,000 the best and 860 the lesser quality. So you get different types of qualities.
Yes. Right. Okay. So if you could tell us maybe now a bit more about generally the silver collection in the Rijksmuseum and what the highlights are.
Then I would need probably a complete hour, but just to make it short and simple. No, the Rijksmuseum collection is the Dutch national collection, and it has been formed from the early 19th century onwards. And what we are trying to do is get an idea of what was made within those 7 provinces. There are 56 centers, so each of them 1 or 2 pieces, but mostly the bulk is, of course, for the main centers of Europe, main centers of Holland, and that's Amsterdam and The Hague. But what we also try to do is get an idea of works of art in silver and artists in silver, and that's what you can see around here. The sculpture, which is the reliquary bust, is one of the first objects, silver objects, which is dated and signed in full, where the maker shows himself as an artist. And that is also in the European context quite rare for that moment. Then we go over to probably one of our favorites as well, is Paul van Vianen. He went to Prague. He was redefining what being an artist in gold and silver is. And his brother, who stayed in Utrecht, Adam van Vianen, when his brother died, he made a monument for his brother, in which he redefined what the art of the goldsmith was according to him about. So he's reacting on what his brother is doing in Prague.
And by the monument, you mean the third picture, the ewer?
The third picture, it is a ewer. It looks like a ewer. It is a cup, which makes it all more confusing, because it is a ewer to be used as a cup. But we can forget about that. But what is great about it is that it gives ornament full reign. So where you have, he makes a wonderful kind of creation, which has been made for the Amsterdam Guild. Well, okay, lots of things to talk about, but okay. And then after him, when he died in Amsterdam itself, the ideas of Adam van Vianen or Paul van Vianen were, in a sense, Mannerist ideas. When Johannes Lutmau came around, which he did in the 1620s, he decided that he would adapt it and transform it into a Baroque kind of world, which means that it turns architectural. The element of architecture is coming back. And you can see it here. So what you see here is that ornament and the figurative are separated, and it is a build-up, as you could say.
Yes, and going back to Adam van Vianen, actually, you're exactly what you said. It's not just the ornament, it's the whole form. And this is actually my absolutely favorite work of art. And I just so envy you that you could handle it.
Well, it is such a wonderful object, because every time when you think you know it, and then you end up looking at it, feeling it, turning it around. It is only, I think, a couple of weeks ago that I actually found that it is not only marked, but fully signed and dated. So in the gilding, underneath, underfoot, it says Adam van Vianen, 1614. It is wonderful. And it never ceases to, well, amaze, I would say.
Absolutely.
It's lovely. But just to, if you are thinking that the Rijksmuseum is only about 17th century Dutch Republic, well, then you can see that works of art in gold and silver are also made in the 18th century. And I would have liked to show you this example, which is a marriage cup. It's made in 1504. It is made by two brothers, born in Orleans, trained in Paris, went over to Amsterdam and became one of the major goldsmiths within the Netherlands. And what is interesting here is that why do we know that they were so important? Well, one of their other creations on which this golden cup has been inspired, I should say, that's not survived. We know that object because it has been published in the time itself. So in 1753, it was, and with this shown one print, there is a 6 of 6, on which each of them tell what it represents, what the things are, but also what the different roles were. And what is great fun is that one was also made. That one was made for the Hague militia, to turn back to where we were before.
I see. And do you only collect Dutch silver, or do you also acquire international pieces?
And we were a bit afraid that if you're only collecting interesting Dutch pieces, but what will happen is that you think that the Netherlands are a separate kind of country, and they are of course not. So that's the reason why I want to collect international silver, and I think. But they should also talk to the objects which are already there. So one of the things, and I think that the next slide would be a good idea then, is that you have one of my other favorites is the centerpiece by Wenzel Jamnitzer, made in the mid 16th century one of the first humanist goldsmiths within Europe. But you will never understand someone like Paul van Vianen, who was an embosser. If you don't know that someone like Wenzel Jamnitzer existed. He was working with a team, so he made sure that the best painters, the foremost humanists, he had to write. There's a poem on there, going from underneath to on the top, which tells you exactly what it is all about in Latin, so that everyone could know what it is about, what you see. But it is also it is a world within itself. But it is a cast piece. So what Paul van Vianen is doing about half a century later is react and say, okay, he is a caster, I will be an embosser. He is someone who is part of a team of specialists. I will do the designing and the planning, the making of the program myself. And that is, I think, essential if you're talking about gold and silver. The next one is a piece of the great French sculptors in silver, where everyone is reacting to. And I think that, so also in the Netherlands, and I think that your Augsburg ensemble is reacting to that one.
Mm-hmm.
And the last one is probably one of my recent finds. And I think that one is also of interest because it represents the Vianen Ewer of the 19th century. It is the first time when a goldsmith again says, okay, once we had artists, goldsmiths. So if I'm going to try to recreate what Cellini is about. And this is one of the first objects made for that. And also the first one shown as art instead of shown as an object made by a craftsman.
Yeah, and I think that's a very, very important point you just made now, that the pieces you've been showing, they really can be considered as works of art. So the makers were real artists and not necessarily craftsmen, because generally I think, well, silversmithing is considered crafts. Yeah, you're back. Great.
Okay. The computer said it needed some fuel. Okay, good.
Okay, great. It's great to have you
Sorry.
back. No, I was just saying that you made a very important point by saying that that silversmithing, that the pieces we've just shown, they're like works of art, and that there are some wonderful silversmiths who are definitely artists and not just craftsmen.
No, but I think also that you have to read, when you look at those objects, you also should, I think, remember that those are the exceptions. So there were just not enough patrons about to treat things like this. Also, just because how expensive they were. Now, if you think that the night watch was, we know what the night watch was paid for. That's about 1,100 guilders, which would be about 3 times what a good craftsman could earn, which is expensive. But if you know that a piece by Paul van Vianen would fetch about 10 times as much, then you also know that you won't find many patrons who can actually afford a thing like that. And I think that is important. That if you're looking at silver, that's the reason why I think you should look at things like this as an exception. You treat them as an exception, but you should also, I think, look at what was made what was also made. And those are things made for wealthy burghers to use to mark specific events. And I think that you have the best object for that.
No, definitely. So I would like to show you now this basket, a baby linen basket, which is definitely a very luxurious object. Well, this one was made by Lucas Lauksen in Deventer at some point in the second half of the 17th century. We don't know exactly when. And here you see where Deventer is situated. So it's like east from Amsterdam. And this kind of baskets, layette baskets, they were of course traditionally associated with babies, and these baskets, this kind of shape, were often made of cane. But then the wealthiest families, they could afford baskets made of silver, and that would be really a ceremonial use. So like a basket like this would have been used to display, for instance, christening robe, expensive textiles that were intended for a child. They are today really rare because there's only a group of 7 baby linen baskets made in the Netherlands in the 17th century that are known to have survived. So there's the one in the Wallace collection. You'll show in a minute your baby linen basket, and there are 5 others here you see in front of you. But we know there were many more because they were mentioned in inventories. There's, for instance, one particular family in Deventer that owned 3 silver baby linen baskets.
Okay.
So they're associated with a baby layette, but they were not necessarily given as when a baby was born, because some, in fact, were made on the occasion of marriage. But then, of course, at that time, the marriage was strictly related. The aim was...
the aim of the marriage is
at that time, at least, to produce children. So there is that link. And most of these baskets were made in The Hague, because that's where the court of the stadtholder was located. In terms of the iconography of our basket, well, the walls of the basket are decorated with flowers, with tulips and putti, so these little angels, which maybe are more like child-related motif. But then the plaque, which is in the middle, well, has nothing to do with babies, really. It's a scene of Apollo chasing Daphne, and she's turning into a laurel tree. And in fact, this motif was taken from Paulus van Vianen. And you in the Rijksmuseum, you have this round plaque that is, well, I think attributed to Paulus van Vianen.
Well, it is Paulus van Vianen. Mm-hmm. We know that the silver, the example in silver exists as well. And important inventions, especially were cast off in lead and then collected by gold and silversmiths so they could use it. So what we do know is that Meneer Lucas Luijksen in Deventer probably had such a plaque. Yes.
Definitely. And then the marks on our basket are really interesting. So you see in the first row, there's the combination. You have 3 marks. And the first one is the mark of the silversmith, Lucas Luijksen. Then the middle one, that's the mark used in Deventer. And then the third one is probably a mark of the assayer, but we don't know exactly the details. But then the middle one, the one that was used in Deventer, is really interesting because it not only tells us that the piece was made in Deventer, but it also tells us something about the quality of silver that was used. And what was quite special in Deventer was that 3 marks were used, 3 types of marks. And the first mark, you see, that's the black and white, in the black and white picture, it's that mark of an eagle. And that tells you that an item was made in Deventer and that the lower quality silver was used. So you would have about 83% of pure silver in alloy. And that mark is found on the majority of pieces made in Deventer in the 7th century. Then there was a second mark, which is that schild. That's the second black and white picture. And that's found on fewer items. And that's higher quality silver. That's about 89%. Whereas you also have the third mark that was used, and that's the combination of the 2. And that tells you that the piece was made of like about 93% of pure silver. So that's the highest amount that was used in Deventer. And that's that mark is really rare, and you don't find it often, but it is. It was using on our basket. Now, we don't know that much about the silversmith, about the Lucas Lauksen. We do know that he trained in Amsterdam, where he must have become familiar with the form of the basket. And then he moved to Deventer.
But do you know anything, more objects made by him? Are they of the same kind of quality?
So we know other items that are by him, but they're not of that quality. They're not that spectacular. They're usually very simple beakers. So no, that one is, so it seems like he did various types of objects.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but that, I think that is expected for a smaller center within the Netherlands, because then you don't have the group is not big enough to specialize.
Mm.
So there is one atelier doing getting all the work that has to be done is done by one or maybe two or three ateliers. Whereas in cities like Amsterdam, while you have in the mid of the 17th century, you have 400 gold and silversmiths working at the same time, then you get about 7 or 8 different kind of specializations. But it is good. What is interesting to see is that when you have one object of a spectacular quality, especially from a small center, you know he is a good goldsmith. But if that's the only thing, if the others are the only thing which we still know of, then you tend to think, okay, he's one from Deventer, that likely, well, they make beakers, kind of thing, that kind of thing. It's wonderful to see an object like this.
Yeah, of this quality. And we don't know to whom this basket belonged, but I'm curious to hear about your basket, because you have the 7th one and you actually know the history of your basket. So please tell us more about it.
Well, the wonderful thing about our basket is, well, you can see that you have it is the same idea. You have the same type of decoration. Ours is a little bit more in keeping with the idea of children, because you have a group of children playing violins and giving a little concert. They are specific for harmony within the family. So you could use it as a marriage basket as well. But the great thing about ours is also that you have in the top of it, you have a small scutcheon. And there you have a name. And that is great, because that name tells you, gives us the name of Ephraim van Welvelde, who was living in Farmsum, which is a city in the north of Groningen. But I think that we should go over to the next one. But we don't think that he was the receiver of the basket. What I do think is, because what happened is that he was the last of his family to survive. So there was no issue. He couldn't hand it down. So what he did, he gave it to a church. And that was the church the family had a patronage for. And that is a very small church still standing in Eelde, where you have here a photograph of about 1900. And you can see that within that church, you have the pulpit, but also the different places for the families who actually were the most important of that part of the country, with their coats of arms. So we know that from that moment onwards, from 1717, it was used as a bread basket used in the Lord's Supper four times a year. And we have even some account where it needs to be cleaned, it needs to be prepared, etc. But that is great, because you have a full pedigree. You know where it came from, but you can't. But you know what happened to it in the 19th and 20th century, and also why it was preserved, because it was given to that church and acted as a monument to the family who no longer existed. But what we also have done, what I've done, is there's a little bit of a problem there in why he can't be the child the thing was made for, is because he was born in 1662 and the basket was made in 1660. So then I thought, okay, let's go back, let's try and find out if we know if there was a child born in 1660. And the great thing is that we have found, we've got results. and there that is my last image, I think, is that his older sister was Josina van Welvelde. She died in 1680 and she was born in 1660. So what we think is that for her baptism, the family went to Amsterdam and got themselves a basket. What is great about the family and what is even more special is that a portrait of her does exist, which you see on the left, and that was made for by an artist working in Groningen and in Frisia. So where they are local in things like painting, they are they want the best and go to Amsterdam to get themselves their Layette basket. And I think that is one of the beautiful things you have in silver, is that where you can think that tells you something about what silver is about. For them, it was important. For them, that is why they asked the best master, the best placement, and even more important than for us now, painting now. And if we have reached that conclusion today, that would be wonderful.
Yes. Well, I mean, it's also, I think, fantastic that you're able to do all that research and like find the history of the items, and they're much more alive. But right, I think we are running out of time, and I want to make sure that people have the opportunity to ask questions. So I think I will, at this stage, thank you, Dirk Jan, so much for our chat. And I really hope that people will be encouraged to come to the Wallace collection, to come to the Rijksmuseum and to really look at these pieces, to examine them. Yes, and we are very happy to take any questions. Ollie, over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Ada and Dirk Jan. It's been a real pleasure to listen in and to look at some fantastic treasures today that in both our collections here at the Wallace Collection and at the Rijksmuseum. We do have a bit of time for questions, so if you're joining us on YouTube or on Zoom, do send those in. We've had a few already, so I'll jump straight into those now. Firstly, a question from Susan, who has asked about the quality of silver. So Susan said, are the lower percentage silver objects softer or harder or physically different from other silvers? Are some silvers better suited for usable objects as opposed to decorative objects? And are they equally shining depending on the type of silver used? So a lot of questions to cover there. So Dirk, you seem to be ready.
Yeah, if you look at different qualities of silver, they exist mainly because it is what people can afford. That is the first and foremost reason. But that being said, if you're the lower fineness, make silver harder, and so you can use it. It makes it harder, so it doesn't.
Yeah, because I mean, silver, it's like when it's pure, it's too soft. So you need to use a different metal, usually copper, to work in it. But it depends. Yeah. So if you have really high quality silver, you have more of silver, you have less copper, and then if you use less silver, you use more of the other material, then of course item will be cheaper.
But it is also the color, which is important, because I have even some 17th century comments which tell you that pure silver is more bluish and it turns a little bit purple. And so that was also an important in the time itself. We now see it as one shiny mesh, but if you look closely, then you can see that it has color, but it is very subtle. And that was for them important even. They even said it with gold is wonderful, is that specific type of jewelry, that the higher standard gold had a better color when worn. Then it stayed longer shining. So there are all kind of things which you won't think about, but which were for the people who use them important features.
Well, thank you so much. I'll have to take a closer look at some of the silver after this talk and see if I can see some of those different colors. Really interesting. Thank you. Another question now regarding the children's linen baskets, baby linen baskets. How large are they?
Like this?
Yeah, that's about the size. But the one in Temple Newsome, which was the first one on your slide, that one is even bigger.
Inner temple.
The inner temple, yeah.
The inner. So the first
one, the first one, that is about the size of half a table.
Yeah. So and it's in inner temple in London. Not many people know about it, by the way. But when there's Open House London once a year, you can visit and you can see it. Just to let everyone know.
And goes and looks at it because it's a wonderful thing. And it's also, but what is important there is also that is a royal one. So it has a royal connection. And as we all know, royals tend to do things a little bit bigger than us normal people.
Certainly.
Sorry, and just to say, now that I'm showing the slide, because I just read one comment and Eva, she mentions a basket in a Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. So yes, that's the third one I'm showing in the slide. That's the one in Boston. I think the second one is in the Dutch Royal Collection. Correct me if I'm wrong, Dirk Jan. I think the fourth one is the one in The Hague in the Kunstmuseum now. And the fifth one, I saw at TEFA, the art fair, a few years ago. And you see there's that red dot next to it. It means it was sold, but I don't know where it ended up.
That one is in the Hague Museum as well.
Oh, so it's now in The Hague. Oh, I was not aware of that. Okay, great.
So you get the good idea. They are easy to follow.
Certainly, I think we'll have to take a few trips to hunt some of these baby linen baskets down. Another question from an anonymous attendee today. They've asked, why are there so few surviving baby linen baskets? What happened?
Well, should I start? Do you want to begin?
Well, very shortly, we have in the Netherlands there are some bookkeeping. That in the how much was melted down in the 17th century. And in 1672, which was when the French invaded the Netherlands, you were able to pay your taxes with gold and silver. And people did so on a very large scale, and even more was melted down then than the whole of the melting down of Louis XIV in about 20 years later. So many of it has been melted down. Not just baby linen baskets, silver as a whole is rare, I think. And the other reason is that things tend to get out of fashion. Baby linen baskets are a 17th century example in silver. Later generations, we move on. And for a christening, for instance, you would give a baby rattle, but then in gold or instead of a baby linen basket.
Thank you so much. It's been fascinating to listen into today's talk. I'm afraid that's about all the time we have questions for. But we do have just a little time left for me to say thank you, of course, to everybody who has joined us from home. I can see we've had people joining us from all over the world today, including Leza O on YouTube from Kansas in the USA. So fantastic to be joined with a really international audience for today's talk. And of course, a huge thank you to both Dr. Ada de Wit and Dirk Jan Biemond. If you've enjoyed today's live talk, please do make sure to tune in next month, whereby we'll be looking at a very different topic to our silver collection. Our Curator of Arms and Armour, Tobias Capwell, Dr. Tobias Capwell, will be taking a look at the Master Armourer of Augsburg, Anton Peffenhauser. So a little bit different to our silver collections, but do come and join us and have a look at that too. Bring your questions as well, of course. So just a final thank you to everyone for joining us, and of course to Ada and Dirk Jan, and good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you.